Well, hello. We continue our healing stories in the Gospel of Matthew today, thinking amidst this pandemic and amidst all this racial injustice that's being exposed in our country, and then the healing, sort of dual healing needed in all of that. I thought maybe it would be helpful for us to read through some healing stories from the Gospels. And so we're in the Gospel of Matthew. Chapter 8, verse 28. I've got to confess to you, this one is a difficult one. There is much here to sort of think through and to talk about, and quite honestly, much debate amongst biblical scholars about what all of this means. So Matthew chapter 8, verse 28. When he came to the other side, to the country of the Gadarenes, two demoniacs came out of the tombs, met him. They were so fierce that no one could pass that way. Suddenly they shouted, "What have you to do with us, Son of God? Have you come here to torment us before the time?" Now a large herd of swine was feeding at some distance from them. The demons begged him, "If you cast us out, send us into the herd of swine." And he said to them, "Go." So they came out and entered the swine, and suddenly the whole herd rushed down the steep bank into the sea and perished in the water. The swineherds ran off, and on going into town, they told the whole story about what had happened to the demoniacs. Then the whole town came out to meet Jesus, and when they saw him, they begged him to leave their neighborhood. After getting into a boat, he crossed the sea and came to his own town. So here Jesus finds himself in a way on the other side of the tracks. And one of the ways we know he's on the other side of the tracks, he's outside of sort of the traditional Jewish territory. And that is because the people were raising pigs, right? And in the Jewish culture, pork was not to be eaten. It wasn't something that they took part in. It was part of the animals that they found to be impure in their faith tradition, and so you wouldn't have had those kinds of animals around. But here he is with a whole group of people who have those animals, and so these are not Jewish people. And he meets these two demoniacs. It says the demoniacs coming out of the tombs met him, and here we see a little bit of the culture as well, and this is true of the Jews as well, that when someone was believed to be possessed by a demon, in those days, they believed that anyone who would have exhibited mental illness would have been accused of being possessed by a demon. And so whether these people are mentally ill, whether they're possessed by a demon, no matter what was happening, they were pushed out to the margins of their villages. So these two are living in the tomb. So out in sort of the caves where this particular village buries their loved ones, that's where the demoniacs live. And it says that the people were so afraid of them, they couldn't even pass by that way. Pushed to the edge, the margins. Now, I don't want to belabor this point, but think about people in our own time who suffer with mental illness and the ways that they're pushed to the margins. Just spend some moments thinking about that today. Some things haven't changed, unfortunately, too much. And it says that suddenly the demoniacs shouted, "What have you to do with us, Son of God? Have you come here to torment us before the time?" That the demons, recognize Jesus. He hasn't spoken to them. He hasn't announced who he is, that somehow they recognize Jesus. And there's lots of different biblical scholars who have talked about this, sort of the recognition of our shadow side, or the because they too were spirits, and Jesus was fully man and fully God, that they recognize in a sort of spiritual way. Some would say that because Jesus was the embodiment of God, the creator of all things, and that demons and evil was a falling away and a rebellion from God, that these spirits would have known the presence of the one who they were rebelling from. And so all kinds of ideas about what is happening there. And then they asked to be thrown into this swine. Well, first of all, they say, are you here to do something with us before the time? Are you here to torment us before the time? And there is this idea that there would be an end time. And at the end time, all those who were faithful would be sort of gathered together and brought into a heavenly life. All those who were unfaithful would be sort of thrown into a hellish or demonic life, and that it hasn't happened yet. And so the demons are saying, well, are you here to do that to us before time has come? And then they asked to be thrown into this herd of swine. And the herd of swine immediately then run and jump off of a cliff. What in the world does that mean? That's been a challenge to biblical scholars for years, and some have sort of spoken in terms of the impurity of swine, and of course the Jewish people originally began not eating pigs, because pigs always eat sort of the leftover stuff, right? Which means they are prone to illnesses. And the Jews discovered that when they ate those kinds of animals, they also became ill. And so they thought they must be impure. They didn't understand the science of it all. But clearly that's not something God wants us to do, because our people eat that animal and they get sick. So it's impure. Stay away from it. And now it takes on this embodiment, that this particular animal takes on this embodiment of being against God. And so that's the place where the demoniacs need to go, is in this place against God. And then they are so full, these swine are so full of these demons that they just run right off the cliff, and all life is destroyed. And one of the things we need to hear in this story is that what is destroyed is not just the pigs, but what is destroyed is this darkness, this illness. That God's desire is to heal and destroy it. And not just to heal an individual, but to destroy that kind of darkness, to bring light into darkness. And so what has happened here is this darkness has entered these two men, and it has left them living in the tombs of dead people and scaring the daylights out of everyone around. And Jesus comes and he brings light that overcomes that darkness. Now, let me just close with what happens. The people of the village come out and they see that Jesus has this kind of power, and they beg him to leave their neighborhood. That sometimes we're afraid of what God could do in our life. Or we're afraid of where God might lead us. We're afraid of what God might do in us or through us. And they ask him to just leave. This might be a good day to sort of think through what are the places where I'm just not handing this part of my life over to God. Like in this part of my life, I want God to be here and be active and be helping me. But in this part of my life, I just want God to leave the neighborhood. Don't be in the neighborhood of that part of my life. And maybe we can think some about how we give that part of our life to God as well. For God is the one who can overcome all darkness. God bless. Have a good day.